All righty. Well, let's begin, shall we? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest AMS webinar. This is Storm Clouds Ahead. What's at stake for storm chasers, weather enthusiasts, and the public with planned federal cuts to forecasts and radar. Thank you for spending your evening with us. This is a conversation that hits close to home for anyone who cares anything about how we understand, predict, and respond to weather. From the data that powers our favorite weather apps to the forecasts and alerts that literally save lives, these proposed cuts could have serious consequences. So tonight we're joined by an incredible panel to address just that very thing. We have Tim Marshall, Dr. Jana Hauser, Josh Morgerman, Mike Nelson, and our moderator, Alan Seals. But before we jump in, a quick reminder to the audience on how things will flow. Audience, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. We'll be pulling questions from there for the Q&A portion toward the end of the session. Any other entries put in the Q&A that are not questions or are indeed questions but are not pertinent to the webinar will be dismissed. No offense. We simply want to make the relevant questions you ask clear and accessible to our panel. Now, let me introduce our moderator for the evening. Alan, again, thank you for joining us. Alan retired from a long and celebrated career as a broadcast meteorologist earlier this year. He is a 16-time Emmy winner, yes, 16. And you may remember his viral explanation of Hurricane Irma back in 2017. He's also an educator, currently teaching weather broadcasting at the University of South Alabama, and a columnist for Lanya newspaper. He's written 3 weather books, one of which is a stunning photo collection capturing the art and science of meteorology. And beyond that, Alan has produced over 100 educational weather videos used around the world. He holds meteorology degrees from Cornell and Florida State, is a past president of the National Weather Association, a fellow of the AMS, and continues to serve as a consulting meteorologist and expert witness. Basically, he's done it all. And we are very, very lucky to have him with us. So, Alan, again, thank you for joining us. And the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Gideon. And good evening, Gideon, and all my panelists and everyone else out there who is interested to figure out this connection between storm chasing, weather data, NOAA, the National Weather Service, the federal budget. We're going to have a conversation, a candid conversation with these experts from different arenas within meteorology about the budget process, which we're not going to go super deep into it, but how it relates to what we do as weather enthusiasts and as meteorologists. I am president-elect of the American Meteorological Society, and this is an organization that's 106 years old. And the purpose of the society, with membership of over about 12,000 people, is to help all of us better understand meteorology, the atmospheric sciences. And it's not just weather forecasters, it's hydrologists, climatologists, researchers, educators, weather enthusiasts, TV broadcasters, web meteorologists. It's everyone who's interested in weather and in some way ends up serving the public. And all that meteorologists do really does at some point go to serving the public, whether it's directly or the case of research or weather models. So this event tonight is in partnership with Girls Who Chase, which is a pretty cool organization. And the purpose of Girls Who Chase is to inspire, empower, and equip girls and women globally to pursue storms and storm chasing, the sciences, and their passions via the use of media, the creation of accessible education products and services, and most importantly, I think, by fostering a supportive, inclusive, welcoming community. So find out more at www.girlswhochase.com, and you'll see the links for the American Meteorological Society and Girls Who Chase pop up momentarily. They also have a really cool spring training event, Storm Chasing 101, very popular. All right, so we are at the end of July. It's been an interesting year in terms of science and budgets, and I'm learning so much as president-elect of the AMS, things I never would thought were important, such as how NOAA is funded, how USGS is funded. So let's start with the broad picture before I introduce the panelists. In the broad picture, every year there's a budget process between the White House, the Senate, the House, to fund agencies. It's known as discretionary appropriations. early in the year, particularly checking my notes back in May, the White House budget initially called for a 27% reduction in discretionary funding for NOAA, 27% cut based on previous years. NASA was given a 24% cut. USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, 39% cut. And if you're not aware of the connection, NASA launches satellites. NASA has satellites. NOAA uses NASA satellites and technology. NOAA uses USGS river gauges. Think back earlier this month, a tragedy in Texas, all of it documented on river gauges from USGS. And then the National Science Foundation cut was projected or desired to be 57%. 57% to the National Science Foundation, which is one of the things that makes our country powerful in terms of science and research, education, private industry, military, National Weather Service, wherever it comes to weather, there's so much that comes out of that. So these are pretty distressing. Now, on the somewhat positive note, I try to be optimistic. The White House puts out the budget, the House and the Senate put out their budgets. So it's a long process going back and forth to actually get to the final number. So far, the House and the Senate have rejected those extreme cuts. They've offered levels that are not as extreme, but it's not over. You may know that the House is in early recess for August, and all of this is going to continue for a while. As optimistic as I try to be, the worst thing that can happen, as I learn, is called a rescission, which is when you get to the end of the agreement process, everything is ready to go, everything is signed, the budget might look okay, and then there's a rescission, which basically says, okay, we didn't spend the money, we're taking it back. So there's so many things that could still happen, and that's the whole purpose of this webinar, to talk about, I guess, some of the unpleasant potential worst-case scenarios. So let me introduce our esteemed panel, starting with my colleague, Mike Nelson. Like me, he's a veteran broadcast meteorologist. 4 decades. This guy has 18 Emmys. 18. That's an award winner. Most recently, he was chief meteorologist at the ABC affiliate in Denver. He is retired from that. But prior to that, he worked at a company called Weather Central in Wisconsin as a forecaster, then a manager, and then a project developer. So he's done some really big stuff within the weather industry. Since then, he continues to author books on weather and climate. He's done almanacs, and he is still very busy in his retirement. Next up, oh, by the way, if you're wondering, I'm doing this in reverse alphabetical order by last name. Since my last name is Seals, I know what it's like to always be last. So we started with Mike. Now we're going to Josh Morgerman. Now, you know Josh may be associated with iCyclone. You've seen him on the TV series Mission Hurricane or Hurricane Man. And if you want to find him in hurricane season, other than right now, just look for the biggest storm on Earth, and the odds are he's heading there or thinking about going there. From the comfort of your home, you can see Josh all over social media as a storm chaser, hurricane chaser, influencer, educator, speaker, and contributor to weather research. So really cool backgrounds we have here. Now, what about Tim Marshall? Tim and I go way back. Tim has worked for Hague Engineering for over 4 decades. One company, over 40 years. That doesn't happen a lot anymore. Tim is a forensic engineer and a forensic meteorologist. Now, that means you take engineering, you take meteorology, and you apply them to the court of law, typically to reconstruct something that happened in the past. So Tim is also a prolific author, speaker, and contributor to many of the wind damage rating scales and standards that we're familiar with, particularly, get this, particularly to the enhanced Fujita scale. Now, we know Ted Fujita created the original scale, but it was enhanced years ago, and Tim had input on that. Part of Tim's expertise comes from storm chasing, and among his many media credits is one as a consultant to a movie that you've probably never heard of it. I think it was called Twister. Yeah, Tim helped out with that a bit. Dr. Jana Hauser, she's an associate professor at The Ohio State University, an expert in severe storms and tornadoes, and not just from theory, but from practical experience as a storm chaser and a storm researcher who was involved with previous vortex campaigns. There's another term that many of us are familiar with. Dr. Hauser's work continues to focus on many of the elusive mechanisms behind tornado formation and existence, often using mobile Doppler radar. All right, I've talked way too much, and now it's time for everyone else to talk. I will start with Dr. Hauser. We'll be on a first name basis, so I'll start with Jana. Jana, what is storm chasing? What is it to you, and what do you think it is to other people?
Yeah, I like to bin storm chasing into three categories, actually. So, in a very broad sense, storm chasing is anybody who goes out and wants to see a storm, a severe storm, maybe a tornado if you're lucky. But I tend to describe chasers as three types. You have the researchers who are going out with some specific scientific incentive and motivation, trying to answer specific questions about the atmosphere. Usually, these are people affiliated with institutions of higher education or specific research affiliations like the National Severe Storms Lab. These are folks going into the field, taking instruments with them, collecting scientific data. And then we have the storm chasers who are aficionados, let's call them. And this is anybody from professional meteorologists to the neighborhood or the neighbor next door, somebody who wants to go into the field and just kind of check out the storms, has an excitement about storms, wants to see the storms for themselves. And then you have the streamers, the YouTubers, the folks that are in it who are really getting up close and who are providing information in live context to the National Weather Service, to local news media outlets, and so forth.
Now, Josh, I know you have a slightly different perspective of storm chasing. I guess it starts with what is a storm?
Yeah, actually, I liked Yana's. Her description was actually I thought it was very good. Actually, it hit the nail on the head. I know for me, my motivations have shifted over time. I think when I was younger, it was just about honestly, I was just an adrenaline junkie. It was like drugs to me. I was one of those people that's just born with that like attraction to violent weather, and I didn't know why. But over time it's shifted and I've become more research focused. Really, what gets me excited now is getting inside the cores of these very, storms coming ashore in very remote places, oftentimes in developing nations where there might not be stations or recon aircraft in those storms to then collect data on the ground to kind of help scientists like the folks at the National Hurricane Center know exactly what's going on the ground. That's like sort of my big thrill now. Now, I'm highly specialized. I only do hurricanes. I don't chase other types of weather. I would say most other research meteorologists, well, for example, like Tim, are much more well-rounded than I.
So, Tim, uh, you're either storm chasing, what is it to you? Or for the public, what is it not?
Well, I have many hats that I wear, Alan. So for me, different projects come along and I volunteer for them. So this past year, I was on a project called Ice Chip. It's an NSF funded project. And our mission was to go out and get in hail cores and pick up the large hail. And part of that is to relate to what's happening with the Doppler on wheels that we had out there as well. So it was a large project with a lot of people involved with, and we found ourselves somewhat impaired by the fact that upper air stations were fewer and far between. We had holes in the data where we had our project, and we couldn't figure out, what was going on there. That data hole actually goes into models, and the models are impaired because of it. So it was kind of really a frustrating campaign, but we managed to make do with launching our own balloons and figuring out what the atmosphere was doing there. But still, it just goes to show you, I'm a data hungry monster. I like data. The more data, the better. So I think we need more upper air stations, not less. And we're going in the wrong direction. So, for a project like Ice Chip, which was funded by the government, we kind of shot themselves in the foot there by not having the upper air stations and the model data and to go ahead and make good forecasts. And that's my concern down the road here. Now, other years that I'm not doing this kind of science projects, I'm out there trying to take nice photographs of Mother Nature because my passion is the storms of the sky. So, yes, I'll chase hurricanes with Josh. I'll go ahead and chase tornadoes. I'll do some hail. I like lightning as well. All the aspects of weather. So I wear many hats, like I say, and really, this webinar here being focused on data to me is the most important. Good quality data.
Okay. So, Mike, your experience, like many broadcasters, you've worked in different parts of the country, most of them being severe weather markets. Your experience with storm chasers or the public perception of storm chasing.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Alan. Much like Jana, I was a weather nut when I was a little kid. We had a thunderstorm in Madison, Wisconsin in 1964 when I was 6 years old, and it had tornado warnings and flash flood warnings, trees down, large hail. We went to the basement, all that stuff. Most people would have been frightened. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I couldn't wait until the next storm. And back then, long before we had all the resources we have now, you turned to the local TV weather forecasters. They were your heroes because that's where you got weather information. And I became familiar with Terry Kelly, who was the founder of Weather Central, because he used to come into the Baskin Robbins ice cream store that I worked at. He liked Jamocha ice cream. For me, this was like a football star coming in. So I would give him the biggest scoop I could get away with. I'd ask him weather questions. When I was 18, my father's urging, he said, ask this guy for a job at the TV station. You have to get paid, just empty his trash cans, answer his phone. So I did, and I got hired. And as you know, and many people out there may not know this, but Alan, Terry Kelly formed a company called Weather Central, which was the very first weather computer graphic system. And I began to install those in the 70s and 80s. So I trained Al Roker on the first weather computer he ever had. I trained Gary England on the first weather computer he ever had, and Bob Barron on the first weather computer he ever had. But I mostly wanted to do weather, not train people on computers. So end up out here in Colorado back in the early 1990s. And as you know, Alan, you end up mostly in the studio, not chasing, right? So now in our retirement, we can go on the outside and watch a nice juicy thunderstorm and enjoy it. But being here in Colorado, I was tangentially able to meet some of the legends. Roger Hill is a neighbor. He lives out in Bennett, and Roger's in the Guinness Book of World Records for more tornadoes seen by any one person. He also runs Silver Lining Tours, the tour company. Tony Laubach, who now works for AccuWeather, was my intern. And back in the early 90s, I used to get a telephone call from a tornado chaser. And what's a tornado chaser back in the early 90s? And he goes, well, my name is Tim Samaras, and I go out and I take a videotape of tornadoes. Would you like to have a shot of it? And so I began to show Tim Samaras's videos on TV, and we became good friends. And about 30 years ago, I called Tim one day and I said, Tim, I just got some passes to this pre-screening of this new movie called Twister. Would you be interested in going to the movie with me? And so Tim Samaras and I sat together and pre-screened Twister, which was pretty cool. And at the end of it, he said, I liked it. It was a little Hollywood, but it seemed okay. So I have not chased a lot, but I certainly have brushed with the greatest of the chasers out there. And so I'll use my experience to speak it from that level.
Yeah, a fun fact for me, based in Mobile, having retired from broadcasting, I saw my first tornado last December in Mobile. And just as you said, Mike, when you're a broadcaster, you have to go to work when everyone else is going outside to see the storm. But after retirement, I literally went to South Mobile County on a slight risk day with an onshore flow, and we get mini supercells. And I waited 2.5 hours using my radar app to watch the couplets, and there it was. So that's simple if you're a meteorologist.
Yes.
So that leads us to data. Josh and Tim brought up a good point about data. And our weather data in the United States is primarily provided by NOAA. NOAA is the parent agency of the National Weather Service. And I'll take a quick side note. I do see the questions coming in, and we will try to get to many of your questions. But the question about data, Josh, you mentioned many other countries don't have the sort of data the U.S. has, and that's a big issue. Yes.
Yeah, I travel and hunt down tropical cyclones literally all over the world, every hemisphere, north, south, east, west. And that has given me a perspective on this. I have a lot of pride as an American, the what we've created in terms of weather science, that not just the computer models and the satellites and the unbelievable radar network, which exceeds anyone else's. It's so good. And the fact that we regularly fly recon planes into storms and that we collect so much data. All of this stuff, it puts us in a class of our own, in terms of being able to monitor weather, understand it, and predict it, because of course all that data that's collected goes into models, which makes them more accurate. But just going to other places and seeing that they don't have these networks that we do, and their forecasts aren't as good, and they're not as able to serve the public and public safety as well as our National Weather Service can. I've realized how fortunate we are and how valuable it is, our network of just sort of like data collection, and also the tools we have to use that data. It's so distinguished, and it's an American treasure.
Looking back, I do a little weather consulting, and I am constantly accessing NOAA data. Tim Marshall does a whole bunch of consulting using NOAA data. So Tim, when you look at the data right now, most of it's there. It's there for you. What are your concerns if a lot of these budget cuts start pulling out upper air soundings and maybe losing the ability to service radar equipment and things like that? What are your concerns with data going forward?
Well, I'm in the forensic meteorology and engineering business, as you pointed out. I use NOAA data every day. I go online. It's free. It doesn't cost hardly anything. I mean, we do pay taxes towards that, but still, it's free. Imagine, if you will, if I had to pay for every radar scan, if I had to pay for every model, if I had to pay for every surface weather observation, that cost would have to be passed on to my clients. And so my rates are going to go up. I like the open access freedom that we have. And that, is something that I think we kind of take for granted. And I would hate to see that go away. I would hate to see part of the Weather Service become privatized, because then it would be for profit. Then you'd have to buy things. I like the way things are now. And of course, I would like to see more data. I'd like to see more upper air stations, and that I'd like to see more of the surface observations, like the automated stations, to be out there. And we have gaps in our radar coverages, huge gaps that we really need to fill in. So I like the CASA radars, the small radars that can go in and be put in areas that, even like in the Dallas area, it's a large area. By the time we get up 100 miles away, the radar beam's too high. We need something lower down, and those CASA radars are great. So I'd like to see a push in that direction as well.
You brought up an interesting point that our country right now is maybe a little more polarized than it used to be with the direction that we're going in, and that goes into the funding of science. One of the things I hear coming into the AMS, American Meteorological Society, is some people say, well, we could just privatize all of it. Private companies can take it over. Mike, you have a good perspective as someone who worked for a private company for so long using NOAA data. So can you put a little spotlight on how private companies work with the free data, and then we end up with all these other products?
Weather Central began similar to an AccuWeather, which most people would be more familiar with it, doing forecasts that were specialized for highway departments and for ski areas and radio stations. So using the readily available public data gave you all of the information that you needed. Very crude by today's standards, what we were doing 45 years ago, but still valuable service. The power companies needed hour by hour temperature and wind forecasts to figure out their power loads, which they still do now. You can't necessarily automate all of that through artificial intelligence. Some of it, yes, perhaps, but you still have to have the raw data even to feed it into the computer system. I think that the having the human element is still very valuable because there are people that can override some of the forecast models and say, you know, I remember seeing a storm similar to this back in 1995, and this is what happened. Let's watch out for that. I think one of the things that we saw down in Kerrville, Texas, was that the warning and preparedness meteorologist, who is very experienced, had taken the early retirement offer in April. And so even though they were fully staffed with bodies, in the weather offices that night. And whether it be National Weather Service or a private weather service, most meteorologists are pretty dedicated, and you would get staff that would come in on a busy day. We certainly, Alan, saw it in our TV careers when, you know, your weekend person would come in when you've got a tropical storm or something, because everybody had to be in there to answer the phones, etc. But when you lose not only some of the data that Tim was speaking at, but then you start to lose that experience. People that have looked at these things for years and just have a muscle memory about how to react to it. I think the difference is a bit like a quarterback, like say a Peyton Manning, that can see the whole field and sees an open receiver 2 seconds ahead of what a younger quarterback. That's the experience level that we're losing with the cuts. We don't have those people that have that breadth of knowledge to make decisions just that much quicker that can save lives.
To follow up on that, I thought about this after I retired, that if you take away NOAA weather data, and if you're old school, if you watch a TV weather forecast, with the exception of a tower camera, and unless the station has their own radar, there's not going to be a graphic behind the weather person, because all of it, the temperature, humidity, wind, satellite, radar, that is all NOAA data, which is the foundation for any weather app. I don't care who makes that weather app. It's any weather app from a private company is built on that data. So continue with data, Jana, when you do your field research, what data are you using to help you get to where you want to be? And then what data are you trying to gather to do the research to figure out the future of meteorology and tornadoes?
Yeah, when I go out with instruments or students for educational purposes, or even just for myself to enjoy chasing, my head is in a computer nonstop, literally the entire time, with maybe the 10 minutes or 12 minutes that I'm actually getting out to photograph and observe storms. And that data range from surface observations, so your weather stations that you get at airports, let's say, that observe surface pressure, winds, dew points, temperature. I'm looking at that constantly to see where moisture is, where wind shifts are, where there are little subtle boundaries holding up in the temperature fields or in the wind fields. Then I'm looking at satellite data as storms are starting to form and adjusting, like, okay, I think initially at breakfast time, I think I need to go in one direction. But then as the day goes on, I need to refine that location specifically. I mean, the Great Plains, let's say, is a very large area, and 60 miles of difference makes a huge difference in whether or not you actually are in the right place. So as it gets closer to the time when you think storms are going to initiate, you look at the satellite data and you see, okay, where do I have a cumulus field that's starting to develop? How can I adjust my position to better locate myself in an effort to try to anticipate where those storms are going to be as they mature? And then as we get into the actual like meat of the chase, when there's actually storms going on, I'm flipping over to radar data, and I constantly have a radar data app open. So this is live streamed, publicly available radar data that are coming from the NEXRAD or WSR 88D radar system. And I use that in every step of the way. And then, I'm looking at modeling data for the outcomes of what the models are thinking is going to happen, before the actual storms form. So the entire day, and even when I'm done with day one, then I'm going into day two already before day one's actually even over. So it's this whole data hose that is inundating me the entire day, and every single product that I'm using has its roots in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration sources.
Now, take that a step further. Going forward
Mhm.
in life, what data do we need NOAA to provide, or quantity or density? What do we need as a profession going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Tim hit on this a little bit. We need to have better observations, and we need to not be going the direction that we're going right now, where observations are being taken away. One of the really important elements of even knowing a few days in advance where we need to go is getting a really good, clear observational picture of the atmosphere in its current state in order to better be able to predict the future state. If we have incomplete observations at any given time, there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to forecast the future state of the atmosphere. People hear the term all the time, garbage in, garbage out. Well, that's very, very applicable to the numerical weather prediction scenario in any capacity. So going forward, if we can have even greater density of radar observations to see storms, as Tim alluded to, there are very big areas of the United States where the physical height of the radar observations that are coming in is hundreds, it's really thousands of feet above the ground. So we're talking about the size of mountains here that the radar is basically collecting information at. So if we can get radars closer and in a greater network, of a denser network, we'll be able to fill those pieces in. And one thing I realized I didn't answer is, what is the data that I'm actually collecting? So I historically go out with mobile radars, and what we do with those mobile radars is we get very close to the storms, and in so doing, we can get very fine resolution information and data about the storm. So we're looking at intensity of precipitation, we're looking at winds, we're looking at properties of the rain and the hail and the things that are falling from the sky. And we're constructing a physical understanding and model of what the storm is doing. My particular interest is looking at how tornadoes form. So I'm looking at areas of rotation at very, very fine, high temporal, so lots of speed, high time resolution data.
All right, we are roughly halfway through our webinar, and just reminding people who are joining in, this is a joint webinar, the American Meteorological Society Girls Who Chase. It's about NOAA funding and how that potentially could impact not just storm chasing, but weather data, weather forecasting, and the public. So we're going to switch now to questions. We've gotten more than a half dozen questions. We'll see how this works. I'll go through a few and randomly ask anyone to answer, whoever goes in first. So we'll start with a question by Jared. And Jared's question is, what do you think needs to be done to get people to actually understand the minimal costs, $4 per person roughly, for NOAA to exist, and how beneficial that is for them personally? So the question is, what do you think needs to be done to get people to really think and understand what's going on?
Alan, I'll take a stab at that first, because you and I, as broadcast meteorologists, we need to mention that more. So often TV weathercasters say, let's check out our Doppler radar or look at our satellite image. And they don't have to do it all the time, but once in a while, maybe on a quiet weather day, say, folks, we oftentimes refer to this as Super Doppler 9 or whatever, but you know what? This Doppler radar actually comes to you from the National Weather Service. And
Yep.
it's what this person says right here, it's $4 per person for a year of all the satellites and the computer models and all that stuff we show. We don't have any of this stuff without your National Weather Service and NOAA. And I think it would behoove us as broadcasters to thank the National Weather Service a little more often for this. I know we try and own it ourselves because that's what our management wants, but just say, these are the facts. This stuff comes to us from tax dollars. We got to support it.
Josh, Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I'd like to second what Mike said, just sort of looking at the online debates. One thing that I found absolutely jaw-dropping was that most Americans do not understand that every weather app they use, every local forecast they watch, everything is powered by NOAA and National Weather Service equipment, data, satellite imagery. I mean, like literally, they don't understand that it's everything. I've seen so many people online say, well, if the National Weather Service goes away, that's fine. This app that I really like, they do it better anyway. And they don't realize that the app is 100%. It's just sitting on top of and using NOAA data. And I've heard other people say, well, I don't care. My local forecaster on channel, whatever is better than them. Again, not understanding the point that Mike just made. So I think it's a like I hate to say it's an educational process, but I think that most Americans, if they really understood what they were getting for $4 a year, and they understood that all of those cool weather apps that they use, everything is actually coming from that sort of wellspring of data and tools. I think that they would realize what a good bargain it is. I think people don't understand that is the issue there, and I think like Mike said, I think all of us. I think as a storm chaser, I need to do it. All of the tools that I use as a storm chaser, everything I use to hunt down the storms is basically NOAA National Weather Service tools.
All right, next question. This one from an anonymous attendee. I'll direct it to Tim, and to me, this is one of the critical ones. It's about the next generation of meteorologists. How will the funding cuts affect the public and private sector jobs for new grads in the next few years? What are the most important jobs for grads to get into to support research and communication of climate change and its impact on weather? And then there's a follow-up question, a student who's anxious about their future because of what's going on. And I'll first point out that this panel represents a huge spectrum of meteorology. So it's not just broadcasting, it's not just research, it's not just storm chasing. You've got forensic, you've got forecasting, modeling, you name it. So Tim, words of wisdom.
Sure. When I first came into Hague Engineering, they had no idea that a meteorologist would be helpful to them. And I showed them that forensic meteorology is actually a discipline. We don't take courses in that, unfortunately, in our colleges, but we should. Really, it is a tremendous niche. And our business has grown tremendously. We have 4 more forensic meteorologists on our staff now because our clients have realized how important it is to find out what happened with meteorology. And it could be an accident of some sort or a construction accident or a vehicle accident, and they need to know what happened. Was the weather any part of this? So I think the future for forensic meteorology is great. And I think the more lawyers there are, the more lawsuits there are, the more forensic meteorologists there's going to be. Now, that said, we rely on NOAA data. So the quality of the data is important. And we're always asked by lawyers, well, why did you come up with that opinion? I mean, there wasn't a weather station there at the site, right? So we have to extrapolate from the nearest weather station. And if that weather station is not operating, or they have an operation of only during the day but not at the night, we need to have that information. Otherwise, we are not going to have the kind of accuracy that we want to have. So again, and going back to what Mike and Josh were saying about where do you get your weather data? A lot of people don't know where the weather data really comes from, and that's really maybe it's the fact that NOAA gets buried in all this, that seldom gets mentioned unless you really are in the know in meteorology. You really don't, have this explanation about where this is happening. And so most people think it's the phone, it's the weather app. That's where they get their weather data from. No, it comes from NOAA. So I think it's more of a PR thing, more of a that NOAA needs to say, hey, if when you fly a plane, you know that the people who are in charge are the air traffic controller and the FAA. A lot of people know that, but when it comes to weather, they don't know where that comes from.
So before we go to the next question, a follow-up with Jana. At Ohio State, whether it's personally or as an institution, what are you telling meteorology students they need to be focusing on and taking to have a better opportunity for jobs in the future?
Yeah, so this is well reflected in what Bailey says right after this, is that my students are scared. They are very unsure. There's a huge sense of anxiety, both undergraduates and graduate students, many of whom really thought they were going to be going into careers in the National Weather Service. And now they're questioning, is there even going to be a job for me when I graduate? The future is hazy right now. We don't know from day to day how things are going to ultimately look in the context of a federal position. So what I'm telling my students is make sure you are versatile. Yes, you love your meteorology and you love your science. At the end of the day, I don't know what I can promise is going to be there when you graduate. So if you acquire skills like GIS skills, computer programming skills, other skills that are tangential to meteorology that meteorologists use, that can also facilitate jobs in other slightly different avenues. And then, hopefully you can incorporate your passion for meteorology into those jobs. That's really what I've been trying to stress to my students, is just make sure you keep your options open and you provide yourself with experience and skills that can allow you to get a job that might not be exactly what you want right when you want it, but you can go out into the workforce.
And my standing advice is follow your passion. There's nothing worse than saying later in life, boy, I wish I would have. You have to aim for what you want to do. And if you miss, you can take a detour or be sidelined for a bit, but go for what it is that you really want to do. Okay, so more, again, these are toss-up. For the toss-up round, question from Pete. Of the severe weather events, which forecast events, tornadoes, hurricanes, flash floods, wildfires, etc., pose the greatest risks to the public from the proposed cuts?
Well, we've
I
seen
think
in
I'd throw that
Texas.
to you, Josh, because I
Yeah.
think the real risk we have is not having the sea surface data and the flights. That's where it's going to get to be really tough.
Mike, I'm glad you exactly. And I wanted to just sort of quickly talk about the hurricane perspective and also to second something that Jana was saying earlier about the importance of data going into the models, that if it's junk in, it's junk out. One of the things that's concerned me is, like, you've heard about how they're not flying as many weather balloons. They're not doing as many recon flights. They seem like very abstract things. Who cares about a balloon up in Alaska or Nebraska? That stuff impacts the accuracy of the models that show where hurricanes are coming. It's all interrelated. And so that cut down, losing data because of cutbacks in recon flights or weather balloons and all that other stuff is going to have an impact on the models. And one thing folks have really talked about, wow, the models have gotten better and better at forecasting the tracks of hurricanes. They've gotten so accurate. You look at Laura, they nailed that forecast track days in advance. And in the last year or two, another interesting thing is these newer models like Halves A and Halves B have actually started to get good at anticipating rapid intensification and other things that, for public safety, we really need to know those things are happening. And the data going into those things, and also technologists being able to upgrade and maintain those models, is everything. So in terms of hurricanes, some of these cutbacks that are being talked about, in terms of data collection, in terms of having technologists to maintain and upgrade these models, are alarming to me. And it's what we have to fight to make sure to protect the public safety in the area of hurricanes.
A good question. Do any of the panelists have any other thoughts before I go to the next question?
I will throw this little tidbit in. The Denver office now, because of closures at night,
Yeah.
has to also handle Cheyenne, Wyoming's area, and Goodland, Kansas. Now, the meteorologists at the National Weather Service are very dedicated, and getting the warnings out is like their last line of defense. That's the last thing they're going to give up in terms of making sure that's their passion. But suddenly, they've got a lot more territory to cover and perhaps less familiarity with the subtleties of certain locations. And that's going to be detrimental to getting warnings out. Doesn't mean they're not as dedicated, But I guess I'd put the case in point. If it worked to make this smaller, if that made it more efficient, I don't know why we are suddenly taking ice and making it so huge. It would seem like it would be more efficient if it was smaller. So I don't think that model, I don't buy that argument at all. It does not work. I do think, and I'll give this one thing, that a lot of this stems from climate change denial. And that was where our science really began to get chipped away at. And the climate scientists didn't think they needed a marketing plan to go to Washington to explain things. They thought, I just need to explain the science. And when we're hearing things about possibly cutting off the lab at Mauna Loa that's measuring the CO2, I mean, this all comes from we're trying to dumb down our country.
And also, to add to that, same thing, the research that goes into those forecasts. The hurricane researchers are being shut down. The radar researchers are being shut down. The people who are in the severe storms forecasting, well, their research division is being shut down. So that is really going to cripple the forecasting because it depends on the research. And going back to what Josh was talking about, this width of the cone of uncertainty has narrowed quite a bit over the years because of the research that has been done. It's not all about the forecast, it's about the research. And so I think that is the big thing, and it's being targeted and being cut out of the budgets.
I'd like to add something too, if possible. Do we
Go
have
ahead.
time, Ellen?
Yes.
So, I mean, my thought here is that we think of climate as climate change in this political platform, right? But fundamentally, climate is weather on a very long-term scale and a very large geographical area, right? So if you're a farmer and you want to know, like, well, how likely is it that my crops are going to dry out this year? We need the basic data that have been collected over long periods of time to be able to put into context what's happening here and now. So if we start getting rid of some of our observation platforms, we're not only affecting our current daily weather, we're also affecting our picture of the long-term trends of what we can expect, what we have experienced in the past, and what we could potentially expect in the future. And it's not about the climate change explicitly. It's about understanding how what we're experiencing currently is fit into the context of what we've experienced in the past and how that might be at jeopardy in the future.
So there are a handful of questions coming down to the crux of this whole panel. What can we do? How do we do it? There's a question about, can we privately fund NOAA? So this is our question now, and I'll start with the answer. The American Meteorological Society, like many other science societies, has a policy arm, and the policy program is involved with talking with legislators, trying to face-to-face, trying to educate them as to the value of science, research, data, all of the above. Each of us, many of us vote, but when you vote, that's not the end of the process. As a citizen, you have to follow the process and keep up with it. You can't drop the ball and just assume it's going to go in the right direction. So each of us has the ability to write our representatives, your senators, your congresspeople. You have the right and ability to call them. You have the right and the ability to even request a face-to-face meeting. So you can do that as an individual citizen or as an organization. So for all of the panelists, and this may be the bulk of our questions from this point, what do we do? How do we try to make this better or prevent it from getting worse? Or did I answer it so well that there's no?
No, you did a great job on that. All right. The midterm elections are going to come up very fast. A year from now, we're going to be in a very different time frame, and an awful lot of people are going to be going, wow, I just wanted gas and eggs to be cheaper. I didn't expect all of this. And so regardless if you're voting blue or red, you can get a hold of your representatives and your senators and say, this is important to me. And if you're not going to do something about it, I'm going to find someone I can vote for that will. And they will listen. Again, Alan, it's like in the TV world. our viewers' perception is reality. And we will do things if we hear from our viewers. So, to what Dr. Hauser said, I would say to the younger folks, do not despair. We're going to be okay. If you have a passion for meteorology, a passion for storm chasing, just like if you had a passion for playing music, pursue it and go in with open eyes of, well, maybe I need to also kind of have a plan B, but don't despair. I think they're counting on despair and they're counting on people just giving up. And we're better than that. And we can still turn this around.
Yep. And to add to that, everyone should know who their two senators are and who their congressperson is. And those are the three people that need to hear from you. And folks are like, "Oh, I'm just one person. It doesn't matter." I've actually worked in congressional offices like when I was like in college as an intern, and the way this works is that they get a lot of calls and a lot of emails about a topic. They add up and it does start to matter. If a bunch of constituents are very angry about something, the people manning those phone and email charts start to notice it, and it does make an impact. And then those of us who are sort of more public figures, either because we're on TV or because we have large followings of social media, can apply more public pressure. And I have been, I live in coastal Mississippi, and I've been hammering my two senators and my congressman about these cuts. And I keep saying, listen, 20th anniversary of Katrina. We're extremely vulnerable to hurricanes. Mississippians rely on good hurricane, forecasts. And Mississippi is like a leading tornado state the last few years. This stuff is the lifeblood to us. And this is public safety, and you are responsible for this. And I've been applying public pressure, calling them out on social media, not in a political way. I don't talk about politics. I don't even identify what party I'm in. It doesn't matter. This is not about that. This is me as a constituent telling my local, like my elected officials that represent me, what I want as a taxpayer and letting them know and being public about it.
I'll add to that for folks who are not yet voting age, you can also write a letter. You don't have to be a voter to express your opinion. Jana, were you about to mention something?
Yeah, I was gonna say there was also a comment or question about like if we don't want to explicitly or other than reaching out in a political sense, what can we do? And I was thinking it's a good idea just to sort of know who's around you. Are you close to an institution that does any kind of atmospheric sciences? Reach out to your news, your public broadcast. And your local news and see what kind of discussion you can open with those kinds of individuals. There's all kinds of needs that exist out there. They're very localized. So starting a conversation with someone locally involved in atmospheric sciences or meteorology in some capacity would be what I would recommend for that.
All right, few other questions. Pete wants to know, will this recording be available? Yes, it will be available on YouTube, and Gideon will talk more about that as we get ready to wrap up. I love John's question about, we've been talking about data in the United States, and I'll halfway answer it in talking about it. The question is, how does this impact other countries? What a lot of people don't realize is regardless of political boundaries, most countries share weather data. It's for a really good reason. And the reason is the weather knows no political boundaries. The weather circulates the hemisphere. So we in the US need to know what's going on in China. In China, they need to know what's going on in Europe. In Europe, they need to know what's going on in the US. So yes, we do have very strong agreements with other countries. And if our data degrades, the European model may degrade. So it's not just a US issue. This is a world issue. Did anyone else see any other good questions or points that you want to?
Yeah, I think let's talk about the privatization and what that would look like. So I guess I'll jump in from a tornado standpoint and thinking about, if NOAA NWS goes away, a hypothetical reality, what would this potentially mean? Well, it could mean that you have to pay for tornado warnings, and if you have money, you get the best tornado warnings, and if you don't have money, you might not get any warning. So it creates a very big inequity in public safety, and it creates a very discriminatory type of a system where those who have can get access to the best information and the best data, and those who have not are left behind and are very vulnerable.
And to just add to what Jana said, such a good point. I think there's a misconception. Folks are like, government should be run like a business. Actually, no, it shouldn't, because a business's goal is to make money. A government's role is not to make money, it's to serve the public. So it's not about profit. You don't want it to hemorrhage money or be wasteful. You want it to work efficiently, and you want it to deliver value for every dollar. But the government and the services it provides are not to make a profit. It's to provide essential services like a police force putting out fires, and also public safety functions like weather warnings. And this is stuff like Jana said. This can't be. We can't live in a society where the quality of the warnings you get are dependent on how much you want to pay per month. That is just like so not where we want to be. Everyone deserves the best warnings, which is what they get now for $4 a year.
Not to
Uh,
mention the liability potential for a private company to issue or not issue a life-saving warning in time. Nobody's going to sue the National Weather Service successfully on getting the warnings out. But if every TV station is issuing their own sets of tornado warnings, first of all, you're going to have chaos. But second, where does that end up that, somebody sues because they didn't get the warning in time?
Awesome conversation, which we can go on forever, but we are approaching the top of the hour. So um, I'll start by, again, thanking all of these awesome panelists for their insights, their words of wisdom, sharing the stories of their careers and paths, thanking Girls Who Chase for partnering with the American Meteorological Society to make this. Oh, I just see we have another 15 minutes. All right, here we go. Good. Now we can go for real. I'm going to look at a few more questions. Any other point while I'm trying to find a good question we didn't answer? Let's talk about climate research, because uh, a lot of things have happened already that are kind of under the radar. For example, the climate.gov website is now redirected to a different website where the data that was really there, obvious in front of you, is now hidden. And if you don't know where to look, you're not going to find it. That goes back to the point Jana may have made about climate is weather averages. Climate is weather history. Yes, climate change is happening, but climate and climate change are not the same thing. We have to know climate. So one of the other things that happened recently, one of the rescissions, I talked about rescissions where you have an agreement and then at the last minute you come back and say, we didn't spend the money, we're taking it back. So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is PBS, lost a bunch of money in a rescission recently. What a lot of the public don't realize is that PBS is the backup for the wireless emergency alert signal path. And that means if the normal path goes down, that signal that ends up on your TV, on your satellite, on your cable, that's going through PBS. Now, it's not a PBS broadcast, it's just a signal path. And ultimately, it gets to your phone. So there are things that already have been taken away bit by bit. And unfortunately, we're not going to see the outcome probably until the worst time to realize, oh, that's gone. It's no longer there. To that end, there was a question about emergency managers and data in the National Weather Service. Did anyone notice that one?
Yeah, and I think the big issue that we face here is we've always talked about safety in layers. It is having the television. It is having a weather call type service that, whether it be an app or one of the services that you can pay a few bucks a year to get a phone call, and it's NOAA weather radio. And we have to have all those layers, because when you don't, what happened on the Guadalupe River is what you end up with. I mean, we have siren systems all across the country that don't work anymore. We need to get that infrastructure back to where we have the layers of support. Because with climate change, all of these storms are going to become worse. Hurricanes are easier to assign than tornadoes, but more severe storms are likely in a hotter world. And we can't stop the warming anytime soon, but we have to prepare for it. So we need to have those layers of capability to warn the public.
Reading a comment here from Cooper. Should we expect sudden changes in the abilities to access NOAA data on October 1st, the start of the fiscal year?
Mm-hmm.
Normally, no, but nothing's normal anymore. Now, along with, I mentioned the budget process and a rescission, you also have a continuing resolution where you basically kick the can down the road and say, okay, we'll get to that eventually. So everything truly is up in the air, and I don't know that anything will be totally settled. So, and I guess that kind of leads to a point that people bring up who are in support of cutting science funding. And that point is that it's constantly changing, and there is no end to the race. It's a constant race. Other good points and questions? Again, I'm scanning through here. Okay, trivia. I had a trivia question here about storm chasing. Let's see if I can pull that back up where I was. So however you define the old days, what's the difference between storm chasing now and storm chasing in the old days with regard to technology, just everything? What has changed?
I recently went up to Aspen and went to the Maroon Bells, which is a classic picture of the mountains and the Maroon Lake. You probably have all seen it when the aspen trees are turning. And what is interesting there is now you have to take a bus from Aspen for about 30 minutes to get up to the Maroon Bells because it used to be just a traffic jam. And typically, if you look at the vista, it's beautiful. If you turn your camera this way, all you see are photographers lining the lake taking the exact same picture. And the analogy to me is storm chasing 30 years ago might be one or two chasers out taking a picture of a tornado. Now, if you were to turn the camera this way, and I'm sure Jana can speak to this, all you will see is a line of storm chasers. It's like the end of the movie Field of Dreams when they pan out and all you see is the line of cars approaching the baseball stadium. So it's the sheer number of people that are out there, which is wonderful because, it's exciting to do, but it's scary because it's hazardous duty and a lot of people are out there that may not really know what they're doing.
Yeah, and also as probably, I don't know, Josh, how old you are, but as perhaps one of the younger members of this group here, my first storm chase was May 12th of 2004. So I've had roughly 21-ish years of storm chasing. And in that time, when I look back, what did we have? What did we not have? Our cell phones dialed phone numbers, and that was it. We had no cell phone internet. We didn't have access to real-time radar data in any capacity. We had a map navigation system, and that was really what we heavily relied on, and our eyes, and hopefully what was a good morning forecast that day to give us a sense of where to go in the right direction. So that, that's just 20-ish years in history that we've changed. Now everybody with a cell phone can go out and have their favorite radar app and find the storm and find their little icon on there and just, get themselves to the storm. It's a lot easier.
No,
Well, I'll say hypothetically, it's easier, but we all still get skunked periodically.
it's changed so much. I mean, I'm older than you, Jana, and like I started chasing in the 90s and oh yeah, no, I mean I remember before mobile phones. I mean I remember like hunting hurricanes with a paper map and a pencil and calling a special number to get the latest hurricane center coordinates. I mean it was crazy looking. It feels like the Stone Ages. And it's actually, and regarding Mike's point about how storm chasing has gotten more popular, when I started storm chasing, this was before the internet. I didn't know there was a thing called storm chasing. I just knew a hurricane was going to hit up the coast and I wanted to be in it. Um, it's gotten so popular now. It's one of the reasons I like chasing abroad and like chasing in kind of out of the way places in developing nations because I'm once again alone. I have the hurricane to myself.
Okay, Tim, come on. Let's talk about the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I want to hear about it,
80s,
actually.
let's go back to the 70s, okay? That's when I started, is in the 70s. And to give you an idea, I had to use a payphone to call the National Weather Service, who in Amarillo had the WSR 57. All right,
Mhm.
that's 1957 vintage radar. And we were talking about blobs on the radar and the shapes of the blobs and whether or not there was any hooky kind of feature at the south end of a blob. And then I
Oh,
remember when VIP levels came along and they were able to look inside the storm for the first time, and we thought that was just like sliced bread. It was amazing. So to actually see inside the storm. So yeah, I certainly have seen it evolve. It's totally night and day. It's today with their mobile apps. Certainly, I had a storm to myself many times out in West Texas, and today there's probably 1,000 chasers out there on a particular storm. So I've seen it, and I think it comes with there's more information today than we had back then, and more popularization of the sport of storm chasing has occurred. And so people want to do it. It's exciting. But a lot of people find out that it's really uh, a hit or miss and mostly miss. So it gets boring most of the time and it's only goes over the top, you know, less than 1 out of 10. So it's not for everybody, and certainly it's getting to be a problem. Some of the law enforcement has told me that they don't want to see all these people out there. It's a crowd problem, and hurricane chasing the same. We've seen in Perry, Florida, there were 100 chasers there for the hurricanes that in Perry, Florida, and it's like the law enforcement don't like that either. So it's becoming a problem if it isn't already a problem in some areas, and that's really leads to that maybe there's going to be some sort of law passed about not doing this in the future and crowding up the roads. So I'm concerned about that as how it gets restricted.
Yep, we are finding lately more and more legislation for things that are, well, like weather modification. I'll leave it right there, depending on.
Yeah.
So yes, it wouldn't surprise me that we start seeing legislation proposals. Uh, but again, the distinction from what we are talking about here is storm chasing, not just as a sport and a hobby and a way to grow your brand as a social media person, but storm chasing with a purpose of gathering data and furthering the understanding of science and protecting lives and property. That's really the ideal situation, is doing it in a way that everybody benefits. So a couple of things, I'm reading two different chat windows here. One of them I need to mention as we do now get ready to wrap up. The American Meteorological Society has a resource page. The link is just posted in the chat, and in that you'll find detailed information on statements that the AMS has put out regarding this whole budget process. You will find links for contacting your representative by state. You will also find a membership application if you'd like to join. We are looking for all interested weather enthusiasts at any level of the spectrum. So that's what you will find from the AMS. I see a note here, the National Storm Chaser Convention will be in Denver in February. And I mentioned earlier, Girls Who Chase has their Chase 101. I don't have that in front of me, but check out www.girlswhochase.com. So with that, now for real, I'd like to thank all of my panelists and all of our guests. It's been a really productive and hopefully enlightening conversation for all of us. And that's the cool thing about science is no matter how old you get, you're always learning something new. I'm reading a few more notes here. So the point I want everyone to understand is number one, the original federal budget proposals were to take away huge percentages of budgets, NOAA, NASA, National Science Foundation, United States Geological Survey. The process is still in play, going back and forth from the White House to the Senate, to the House, to the appropriations committees, back and forth, trying to come to an agreement. But now we're going into August recess. And then, even once that agreement is made and things are signed, there's still always the possibility that things get undone through a process called rescission. It's not done. You have a voice, you have a vote. Use it. And with that, I will turn it back over to Gideon and say thank you again to everybody.
Well, yes, very much. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. And Tim, Jana, Josh, Mike, thank you so much for guiding us through this important discussion. There's a lot of information, a lot of things that we needed to hear that were offered this evening. And yeah, very grateful for that. To everyone who turned in, the full webinar will be available soon at amsweatherband.org or on our YouTube channel. And if you stick around long enough after I talk to you, I'll drop the link to our YouTube channel. So feel free to revisit it or share it with your colleagues and the communities that you're a part of. And if you're an AMS member, we'd love to hear your thoughts over at the AMS Open Forum. So let's please keep this conversation going. This is important stuff. And yes, thank you finally for being part of the AMS community and for joining us this evening for this AMS event. We'll see you next time, but good night. But hang on, I'm going to give you that link right now to our YouTube channel. But otherwise, good night.